this gets into a little bit, but before we start, I just want to tell you guys, nutrition is a huge topic. Okay, so you probably know this. You probably all have some misconceptions and lots of ideas about nutrition, which I will give time for. So it might feel like I'm kind of, pushing through some of these, but because I want to allow time, because there's so many misconceptions around nutrition and health. So I want to clear some of those things. So we'll allow time for the end. If you do have questions, how I have things set up right now, I cannot see the chat. So I'll give moments if there's relevant questions to what we're talking about right at that moment for me to clarify. Otherwise, if you have questions about health or nutrition or diets and things like that, we'll wait till the end, and so we just don't get too off topic. So I'm going to present a little bit. Hopefully it doesn't feel too sciencey. Oh, I forgot to press play. Then you can see the bananas rotating. Sorry, that's a little cheesy. Anyway, so what we're going to mainly talk about is the basics, the essentials of things that I've found that many people miss or have misconceptions about. So this is not all encompassing of nutrition. Goodness, that would take, I don't know, like 10 years. So it took me 5 years to complete college. So that gives you an idea. And we do not have all that time. So we're going to talk through some essentials. I think I have about 6 of them. And how the real focus of this is how to have a healthy relationship with food in your body. We won't go as much into the whole body image piece other than at the very end, although I'm very passionate about that. And knowing that I had my own body and body image struggles and food issues. So that will be in kind of throughout this. But anyway, I want to start with this prayer that John says in 3 John 1:12. It says, "Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul." This is my prayer for all of us, especially today. Let me see here. Okay, so I kind of gave an explanation, but I don't know, hopefully you can see this little, I don't know, blue dot. This is more of what I do. So I am a private practice dietitian, and I work a lot with people individually or couples, or maybe a mom and a child, or a variety of situations. But it's more of if you've ever seen a therapist, I talk through a lot of what is called medical nutrition therapy. So we talk through mental health and the impacts depression might have on your health and your eating. I work with a lot of eating disorders, so it all encompassing of medical professionals and therapists and the whole gamut. So oftentimes people think this is what I do, this one of telling people, don't eat a donut, eat an apple. I can't stand that. So I am not that type of person, let alone dietitians don't typically condemn people, hopefully. And I'm all about, following the ways of God. So I believe that there's no condemnation in Christ Jesus, and that includes food. So we'll talk through some things that might be more beneficial for people versus not as beneficial. Obviously, if you eat 10 donuts a day, you might not feel the best, but there doesn't need to be a lot of shame that's associated with our culture around doing such things. However, if you eat 10 apples a day, you also might not feel that great. So there's oftentimes this saying that goes, everything in moderation. And I really think practically it's a great saying. So we want to have things in moderation. There are some things that we maybe don't need moderately, like, I don't even know. I can't even think. Maybe coffee in moderation is okay, but for some people it might not be. So it's really I take people through an individual process, not telling them this is bad and this is good and how dare you eat that. So there's really not a lot of that what I do. I do some meal plans, but it's sparingly. I don't really put a lot of people on diets. I'm not a huge diet fan. I know my title is dietitian, which I don't love, but diet just means the way that you eat. So it does make sense, but a lot of people have certain connotations with diets, like it's very restrictive and things like that. So anyway, so to the next main essentials. So we'll talk through a few. What are they and why do you need them? So these are not just main essentials for nutrients, but we'll talk through some of the nutrients, but the main essentials as far as health all encompassing that I find. So the first one that I find people really miss is listening to your body. So this just gets people all worked up when I work with them. So a lot of times people cry, honestly. Because oftentimes people have gone to a lot of guilty places where they feel a lot of guilt about what they're eating, what they're not eating, and it brings up a lot of emotions, as well as there's such a thing as emotional eating that many of us do. I know I did that and have had to work really hard to get out of that. And when it comes to emotional eating, there's a lot of emotions. I oftentimes use this phrase that we often stuff our face. We stuff our feelings by stuffing our face. And this is often the case. And what really happens is listening to your body and your natural cues, but not using food to disregard or to numb your feelings. So listening to your body, what does that mean? We'll go through roughly. This is the real quick version, but there's some words that you might be familiar with, you might not be familiar with, but there's a word called mindful eating or intuitive eating. All this means is listening to biological hunger and fullness. Now, I will give you a diagram you can take a picture of. We'll talk through this a little bit. But listening to your body pushes out the whole fad diet mentality. Because what diets often tell us, and this was part of my journey, and it's many of my clients' journey, is diet, these rule-based ways of eating. And when we have a lot of rules and we break them, let's say you have a rule to never eat chocolate, and then you break that, and then you eat chocolate and eat a lot of it because, well, if I ate that chocolate, now I'm eating all of it. So I might as well just throw it all out. But that's where diets set up this very, what we would call legalistic or rule-based system that honestly is not research-based at all. In fact, research shows us that those that do diets tend to have a yo-yo dieting effect and tend to put more weight on, have more health issues, as well as more susceptible to eating disorders. This was true of my case. I did a diet and I became very restrictive. Before that, I was not even thinking about calories or counting things or my weight, and it just spiraled me. So we want to be really mindful and not mindless in our eating, or we're just not thinking about it, but we also don't want to be too obsessive. So hopefully this makes sense. It's hard when I can't interact with people, but so I'll give a moment after this essential number one to ask some questions if they're pertinent. But what happens is, so I'm going to use an example. So I have this plant back here. So you maybe saw this plant behind me. I don't know if I was blocking it or not, but this plant we're going to just use as an example. So this plant, if I tell you this plant is bad, don't touch it, all of a sudden there's this thing in you, and it's a little bit of this maybe sinful side of us, or it just, a little side of us that's like, oh, I kind of want to touch it now. You didn't think twice about this plant before, right? It was back there. You're like, oh, what a cute plant. But if I tell you, don't touch this plant, don't you dare touch this plant, all of a sudden you're like, I kind of want to touch it, but no, I shouldn't touch it. All of a sudden there's this thing called shame and condemnation that's introduced. Now, this is a silly example, but this is what happens oftentimes with food. With food, we're told, don't eat that. And if you eat that, like, you're bad. And that's shame and condemnation. And this is not helpful, nor is it biblical. If we're people who follow Jesus, we want to follow what the Bible says. And what research says as well is it backs it up, backs the Bible up, and saying, hey, having the good and bad mentality around food, having this diet mentality around food of not eating certain things, does not help us listen to the God-given cues that he has given us of hunger and fullness. And if we actually listen to hunger and fullness, we actually find that people eat the amount they need. They eat the amount of nutrients they need, they eat the amount of calories they need, which we'll talk about a little later. And so if you really start, the essential number one, it's on purpose, because if you really start with just first and foremost trying to listen to your body, it's going to be helpful for your entire life. So easier said than done. How do we do this? So if you might have to like move my little screen or whatever. But if you happen to have like your phone on you, unless you're on your phone, I don't know if I can share this with you. I guess you could probably email whoever sent you the information. I bet I can find out how to send this to you. So, or maybe Tammy has some ideas. So I'll allow for some questions at the end of this little deal. So this is what we call our hunger and fullness continuum. This is really, really helpful if you have struggle knowing if you're hungry or full, which many of us do. Many of us, when I even ask like, what is hunger? Most people will say, oh, it's when I'm really low energy or have a growling stomach, which by the way, a growling stomach is too hungry. So that's not the best indicator of hunger. So what is hunger and fullness? Well, this continuum helps us. Let me actually see if I can. Yeah, I think I can draw. Okay, great. So hopefully this will allow me. Does it allow me? Yeah. Okay. So, okay, I will try my absolute best to make this look nice. So this is where we want people to typically be. Oh, I was saying, if you have your cell phone or whatever, you can take a picture of this and then come back to it and reference it. So this is what we call, this zone is what we call satisfaction. So satiety is a term that we use in the nutrition world to mean satisfied, to mean full. Now, many of us think that full means actually stuffed. That is not the same. Stuffed is this zone and starved is this zone. Clearly not great with using this pencil thing, but you get the idea. So this is starved. Starved has very clear hunger signs. These are dizzy, feeling like you're gonna pass out, cranky. This is the hanger stage. If you're hangry often, you're too hungry. So if you're getting moody with your friends or parents or siblings and you haven't eaten in a while, this is hanger stage. You need to eat. This is where your body is starting to go into starvation mode, and that can cause a lot of complications in our metabolism and a lot of health issues if we're there too often. So if you tend to be there, this is a great thing for you because now you can understand, okay, how can I get out of that? So let's say you are really like at a 2 when you start eating, or maybe a 3. This is how you move up. So, and how you know if you're hungry or not anymore. So you move up and you're at a 3 or so, and you're like, I'm not on the verge of collapse anymore. I'm not feeling like I'm gonna pass out. And yet I'm still thinking about food and I still have an urge to eat. And I'm still truly hungry at a 4. And as I get to a 5 and a 6, I'm kind of neutral, but if I don't continue to eat, I'm gonna be hungry in like 1 or 2 hours. Some people love eating like that. I don't personally. I don't wanna eat every 1 to 2 hours. I don't have the time for that. Some little bit of research indicates that can be a helpful way of eating, but not a lot of research is showing that, and eating where you're a little more full also shows to be helpful. So notch past neutral is like, yeah, I can eat some more. I'm not gonna feel stuffed, which we'll talk about that, but 7 and 8 is where I typically recommend people get to. The 7 or 8 is where you're really satisfied, where you're like, oh, I feel great. I feel full, I feel energized. I may feel a little sleepy, but it's because my body's relaxed. And if you stop here with that fullness, you're hungry about 4 to 6 hours later. Now, this can vary per person. So don't get too stuck on this time, but just know that's a great indicator that you were full. A 9, a 10 is what I call Thanksgiving full. It's that one time a year that you are so uncomfortable, you need to unbutton your pants, and you're like, oftentimes I hear people say this, like, I never want to eat food again. Well, in reality, they're going to need food, but they feel sick. Both of these, 0 to 1, 9 to 10, make us feel uncomfortable and sick. We don't want to be sick. Our body doesn't like being sick. We want to be satisfied. Okay, let's see, how do I, there we go. Hopefully get out of that. Okay. Oh, now it has all the, okay, well, I do those. Clear all drawings. Okay. So I would love to hear any questions, and then I'll go into this little deal.
Okay, So I'll hop on here. We had a couple of questions come up while you were speaking. Let's see. There's one that asked, I find that concerning diets, I have generally a negative view of dieting, but a couple of friends of mine have done the carnivore diet and so far seem to had good benefits. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on the carnivore diet and if it's beneficial.
Okay. So I'll talk through some diet stuff at the end. So if it's okay, we might come back to that. So will you just?
Yeah, we actually have quite a few just general questions, Christina. So if we want to,
so we'll come back to those because some of them might get answered, some of them might not. And if the ones that don't, we will just address at the end. So, so awesome. Okay. So this is out of Mark 7. I love when we see that science is showing that the Bible is accurate. Most people have this misconception that if you believe in science and research that it's anti-God, or people have this view that like science and God are separate. No, they're totally not. And I have a science major. I love science. And the things that we see that science is proving, there's a lot of science that will never be proven, but the science behind nutrition is showing that what Jesus even says in Mark 7 is completely accurate. So this is what Jesus says. He says, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. By the things that come out of a person are what defile him." And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples were confused. And he says to them, "Then are you also without understanding?" Basically, are you confused? "Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach and is expelled? Thus he declared all foods clean." So what Jesus is saying here is, hey, Jewish people in this time, just to give you a little reference, in this time and now still have a lot of laws and restrictions around food. So this would have been crazy that Jesus is saying this. And it's backed up over and over and over again when you see in scripture. And what Jesus is saying, hey, what matters is you guys are all focused on this food piece and it's distracting you from what really matters. And I'll tell you, I see this over and over again, that it doesn't mean that food doesn't still matter. I have a degree in, basically food, so hopefully it still matters. But when we focus too much on it, and when we start going clean, not clean, it starts bringing a lot of morality to food that was never intended from God. That was never his perfect picture. And so it helps us to not be distracted by it, to still enjoy it, to still love it, to still recognize God has made it so certain things are beneficial to our body and our body needs certain things to live and thrive. However, when we get too focused on that, we see there's a lot of complications. And in fact, Jesus says, hey, don't focus so much on that. What matters is your heart. So love it that Jesus gets it. So essential number 2, I promise I'll go into some nutrient issues or things, but essential number 2 is have fun with food. Colors, flavor, company, all are important. When you look at this picture, it looks fun. It's an enjoyable experience. I firmly believe, and we see over and over again, how helpful it is for people to not eat alone. Now, it might still happen, eat alone on occasion. I mean, I'm only, a 2-person household, me and my husband, so there's times where I eat alone. But even if you're eating alone, there's ways to have it be more enjoyable. So flavor is vital. And most people just eat very bland foods. But when you look at this picture, there's lots of flavor. Like sausage has lots of flavor. I don't even know what that is. Some pie, some version of pie. I think it's strawberries on there. And even when you have a salad, having dressing adds flavor, as well as colors. Colors represent, when you have just one color in your diet, what you're eating, when you have just one color, you're only getting one set of nutrients. So multiple nutrients, but just certain kinds because the colors represent nutrients. For instance, carrots have carotene in it. And carotene is the color orange. So when you have orange, when you have red, when you have green, all of those represent different nutrients, or brown, different nutrients. So you want variety and have fun with it. Flavor adds fun. It's supposed to be enjoyed. So that's essential number 2. Now we're going to get to some specifics. So macronutrients. Essential number 3, realizing there are such a thing as nutrients. So it will take way too much time to go into all of the nutrients. There are macro and micro. We're not going to talk as much about micronutrients, but we will talk about macronutrients. Macronutrients are carbohydrates, protein, and fats. Many of you probably know this. You probably took some health class, but you may have had some misconceptions around it. So carbs, for instance, rice, hopefully don't get too distracted by this video, but rice is a carbohydrate. Breads, grains, corn, cereals, fruit, and dairy all have carbohydrates in them. There are some others as well, but those are the main ones. Why do we need carbs? Let me just tell you, carbs are not the enemy. Carbs get picked on, carbohydrates, people get told, oh, you're gonna get diabetes. Diabetes is way more complex than that. Or people claim, oh, you'll gain weight by eating carbohydrates. Not accurate. Obesity and weight gain is also way more complex than that. Your body actually needs carbohydrates. Your brain functions solely off of carbohydrates or glucose. So that's the broken down carbohydrate known as sugar. So when we find people limit their carbohydrates too much, there can be some serious issues. For instance, energy issues can be one, brain function where they get a little bit of a foggy brain, and carbohydrates are also very easy to digest. So when people don't have a lot of them, sometimes they can even have some digestion issues. Obviously, there are people who have certain intolerances to all of these foods. That is a whole nother story. And we might come back to the carbohydrates piece because I know they get picked on quite a bit. Protein. Why do we need them? Protein is really helpful for us to heal and repair. When I worked in a hospital, we had a lot of burn victims. So people have had 2nd or 3rd degree burns, and they have to have double the amount of protein that they normally would, because it helps the body repair, nerves, skin, any type of damage. And so protein is vital for us to have. It also helps us feel fuller for longer. So when you don't have a lot of protein in your intake, you will struggle with feeling hungry all the time. And then it helps with, obviously, everyone thinks of protein as muscle growth, but also muscle and cell growth. So it will help to a certain extent with muscle, but it's not only for muscles. So, and then what are they? They're broken down into what we call amino acids. This is probably going to get way too sciencey, so I won't get into all of it. If you're interested, we can have a whole off the clock conversation or something about it. But there are certain amino acids. So amino acids are the broken down parts of protein. And there are 9 essential ones. What does that mean? That means your body does not make them. You have to have them from what you're eating. So if you don't get those 9 essential proteins or amino acids, your body won't repair as well. It's not going to have as great of cell and muscle growth. So it's very important that we get protein intake. So one of the things I recommend for people when it comes to any of these foods is that you have them on a consistent basis. So one protein source, like 1 egg, would be sufficient for consistent amount. So if you have, let's say you have 1 protein source at breakfast, 1 protein source at lunch, 1 protein source at dinner, you're gonna do pretty well. And same with carbohydrates, consistent carbohydrate intake and consistent fat intake. So what are protein sources? You're probably well aware of these, but they're poultry, fish, beef, beans, eggs, dairy, nuts, and soy. Soy is like tofu or soybeans. If you happen to be vegan, you can still get enough protein, or if you're even vegetarian, you can definitely still get enough protein. Last but not least is fats. Now, I have to have a disclaimer here always that eating fats does not make you fat. So many people think this. They are not the same thing. That's not how that works. It's not if I eat fat, it just turns into fat in my body. How that actually works is when we overeat, when we overdo, when we're always in that, not always, but when we're often go to the stuffed phase of the hunger and fullness continuum, our body will store fat because it thinks, I guess she needs a little extra, or he needs a little extra. So we'll store this for another time. So just a disclaimer, that is not how that works. I typically like to use the word fatty acids because that is literally what they are. They're fatty acids. That's what they're called. So, and that has less negative connotations for people. So when you think of fats, think of fatty acids. I need those in my intake. So why do you need them? They're a great energy source. They help with hormones. They help with heart health. They help with a variety of different things. This is not just, hormones because you're a teenager. This is for everyone. This is actual hormone health overall. And they help as well as your heart being able to get proper nutrients. Now, it can also, certain fats can cause some issues with your heart. And this goes into what they are. And this is where saturated versus unsaturated fats. So saturated is animal fats, unsaturated is plant-based fats. And I'll explain that a little bit. Animal fats are things like dairy or even fats from a steak. Those, if you have too much of them, now this is, you're talking like a couple times a day, you're having a lot. Now, most of you're gonna break down these no problem. But if majority of your fats are from animal products, you might have some heart issues later on. But what can happen is the fats can coat in your arteries and can cause hardness, and then that can later on down the road, we're talking years and years and years down the road, can cause heart issues. So it can dislodge and cause a heart attack and stroke and things like that, which you don't want, but you don't need to be too worried about. You can still have animal products. It's just making sure they're even, like having both unsaturated plant-based would be olive oil or avocado and things like that. So trans fat, I just put on here, trans fats are made by people. They are man-made, and they are not, this is one of those things where I don't call them bad, but your body doesn't process them very well because they're man-made. They're not made by God. So our body doesn't know how to process them. So they're pretty much eradicated in the American food, but not always. But you don't need to be too worried because most things don't have them anymore. But they do cause some digestion issues and some processing in your arteries issue. What are they? I already went over, but olive oil, canola oil, corn oil, vegetable oils, butter, dairy, any other animal product will have fats in them. Any questions about those specific things? We'll give time for.
You know what, Christina, somebody had a question about hormones. Can you explain like what hormones you were talking about so they understand?
Yep. So there are a variety of hormones. So you have an organ right here called your thyroid. Hormones help the body process and work together and have certain functions. So I'll give an example. So your thyroid, which is not so much connected to reproductive hormones. Reproductive hormones are like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Those are the ones that teenagers, find increased, and people always make fun of it, but it's actually the way the body's made. So hopefully we'll have an increase in those things in this age. But those stabilize and you still have them when you're getting older. But let's use the thyroid as an example instead of like a uterus or something. People feel more comfortable talking about the thyroid. So your thyroid has thyroid stimulating hormones. When you're not eating enough food, your thyroid can be impacted because you aren't giving enough of the nutrients it needs to make hormones. So your thyroid can be diminished and depleted. And those thyroid hormones actually give us energy. They also help with reproductive. So when someone's thyroid is off, let's say a woman's thyroid is off, she might have menstrual cycle issues. And that might be related to other things, but it can be related to thyroid. Also, thyroid is related to weight. So people have fluctuations in their weight. They'll also affect hunger. So this is how those hormones go out from your thyroid and go to all these different places and help regulate the differences and processing of calories or how quickly you process things in those different organs. So it's all connected, but thyroid, for instance, thyroid hormones They're helping throughout your body with things functioning properly. So molecules, you could say, and when you're deficient in them, there's going to be problems, not just in where they're coming from, but throughout the body.
Awesome. Okay, so the next question was, is it possible for a product containing saturated fat to still be vegan?
Oh yeah, great question. Someone knows their nutrition. Yes. So here's an interesting thing. There's more and more studies on palm oil. So think of like tropical oils. So palm and coconut oil have saturated fat. I should have actually just grabbed my coconut oil because I could have showed you guys this. So they actually have saturated fat. There's a lot of research right now on whether or not that can cause the same problems as animal products. And there's speculation that it can collect and harden in your arteries. We're not totally positive. So there's not enough research to actually claim that, but it's good to be aware of. So yes, and all of those products are vegan.
Awesome.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. There's some other questions, but I think we can wait until the end for those.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'll rush through this a little bit. So I'll just make this simple. There's a lot more to this, but I just think it's important to mention calories a little bit because people do talk about them, and I just want to explain them a little bit more specifically. So calories just equal energy. So the essential number 4 that I find is people oftentimes don't eat for energy, to increase their energy. If people are tired all the time, I often ask them, are you eating enough? Like, let's talk about if you are eating enough, and we'll talk through what they're eating. And oftentimes I find those people are not eating enough, which means they're not getting enough energy, also known as calories. So why I have a picture of a car here is you wouldn't, whether you drive or not, you understand that cars live off of fuel and gasoline, right? So calories are our fuel for our body. You wouldn't think like, oh, a car should be on empty all the time. No, that would be silly. You want to fill up your car with gasoline. And what we find even in a car, if you're always on empty and just filling up a little bit, it starts wearing the engine quicker. The same happens for our bodies. Now, our bodies are way more complex than a car. But this is used, the fuel that we get from food is broken down as calories, energy, and it's brought throughout the body. It is way more complex than that, but I'm not going to go into all the details. But what it's used for is 10% digestion, 20% physical activity. So just your normal activity. Doesn't mean you have to be a very physically active person, but moving around, going on a walk, walking to the mailbox, getting your mail, like things like that, just any movement. And then 70% of just body functions. What that means is organs, those hormones, the thyroid thing I was talking about, that all requires energy to be processed. So calories are vital, 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 vital. They get picked on, people get told, oh, you don't want to eat that, that has too many calories. That is a lot of misconceptions around that. Calories we do need. And if you don't get enough, then your body's deficient in its function. So what happens then? Let's say you're not meeting enough of your energy needs and you're tired all the time. The reason you're tired all the time is your body is going to muscle stores, breaking down muscle, to provide it with the 70% body functions, because your body needs to function. It needs its organs to live. It can break down muscle. You don't need muscle to live. Well, you need some muscle, but you don't need as much to live. So we want to provide our body with enough calories so that way it can do the proper things it needs to do without breaking down muscle. All right, 5, this one's simple, this will be quick. Essential 5, drink water. It helps with hydration, helps us not have headaches, cushion, joints, healing, all of those things. How much? Basic thing is drink when you're thirsty. If you have a dry mouth, if you notice really flaky skin, you know, so you're thinking about water, drink water. Cold water, hot water, doesn't matter. It can be sparkling water. And I do mention the limit caffeine because I know a lot of people love energy drinks or coffee. It's not highly recommended for teenagers because you're still in development. But if you do have some, I recommend less than 1 cup of caffeinated beverage a day. The issue with energy drinks is there's not a lot of studies done with these, and we're finding that a lot of people are just downing them and replacing food, and it's not recommended. So if you still like, I want a little caffeine, okay, I'm not gonna, tell you otherwise. Have just limited amounts. And then essential 6, make movement. This also probably makes sense, but I love the word movement more than activity or exercise or working out, because all of those just have certain connotations with them. Like, who really want, it's like, are you gonna go work out versus, hey, you wanna move around? Sounds way better. Like, oh, working out feels like I have to go to a gym. You don't, but working out is helpful. Moving is helpful. Our bodies are made to move. And they're not made to sit around like many of us actually do, just because of our day and age and COVID maybe. So, but we need it for heart health, fighting sickness like COVID. Actually, moving is really helpful. Getting outside, being careful with that, obviously. Helps with breathing, your lung capacity. It also helps tremendously with mental health, loving your body, appreciating your body, digestion. And I put ... because it just goes on and on and on. How much movement do you need? It really varies per person. However, the recommendation I have is get outside. Getting outside is really helpful. Now, depending on where you live, that might vary, but it can be, moving around your house, doing stretches, whatever. I recommend like about 15, 20 minutes a day. And that just helps people be consistent with it. But there's no, don't get too stuck on that. But moving, you'll see the benefits of it. Like, you cannot not. Last but not least, and this is not just for women. I don't know, people oftentimes think, oh, beautiful is just for women, or people who struggle with body image is just for women. That is not the case. That's not what this for a quick moment. The body is phenomenal and truly is beautiful. God made us marvelous. And this Psalm 139 is great if you struggle with your body image and just quoting it, memorizing it. But it's so clear and so profound and so accurate. And this is David, by the way, talking. So this is a guy talking about his body. Okay, I always love that. So this is what he says: you made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. Our bodies are wonderfully complex. Like I mentioned, way more complex than a car, way more complex than a car. It's oftentimes helpful for us to appreciate our body. In our culture, there's a lot of critique on our body, and many of that is very, very, very harmful and inaccurate. So there's some helpful things to do in starting to appreciate your body. One of the things, oftentimes we can, people like look in a mirror and say, you're beautiful. That can be helpful. It totally can. But one of the things we find is actually really helpful is this understanding that your body is wonderfully complex piece. And this has been backed up by many, much research. So what we see is, rather than just looking in the mirror and telling yourself you're beautiful, which I don't laugh at because that is helpful, it shows to be helpful, but is actually finding ways that you see that your body works properly and is functional and is complex. So things like, one of the things, I wrote a couple things down so I didn't get the numbers mixed up, but for instance, taste buds. Like, your mouth contains 9,000 taste buds. That's crazy. 9,000 little bugs, not real bugs, little dots in your mouth, little buds all over that 9,000 all in your mouth. It's just insane. Another thing is, a human skin accounts for 12% of your body weight. The human skin, by the way, is considered an organ. It absorbs lots of nutrients this way, like vitamin D, a lot of different things. So when you can think of, like, when someone's really critical of their skin, oftentimes I'll remind them, did you know your skin is so complex that if you did not have your skin, you would not get vitamin D. And so when we can start thinking through, and it might seem silly, it might seem like, that's so like ridiculous and feels corny, but it really does work, because the reality is your body is working. So when you critique your legs and say like, oh, I hate how they look, oh, they're this and that, not helpful. We all know that. But how we can get out of that is when we're on a walk, when we go, man, I so appreciate that my legs work. It's so awesome that they have muscle in them that are able to move, that I'm able to even function as a human and walk. Even if I can't walk very far, that's okay. I can still walk. So doing things like that helps us really appreciate the complexity that God has made our body a certain way, rather than just breaking it down negatively and critiquing all the time. That is totally the way of our culture, and it is not helpful and causing lots of issues. Okay, so those are the several different essentials. We have about, let's see here, we have about 15 minutes to answer some questions. So
you've got a lot of them.
What was that?
You've got a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start with those. So should we drink water even though we might not feel thirsty? Somebody wanted to know.
Yeah, so that's a good question, because that does happen. It's helpful to see like how much are you drinking in a day. I oftentimes recommend like have like this is my water container. Sometimes coffee is in it, but I'll drink about a few of these a day. So let me give you some, hopefully this isn't too graphic, but your urine is a great indicator if you're hydrated enough. So if your urine is slightly yellow, not, so like the yellow behind Tammy, not good. Not good for urine color. If you can tell it's yellow, not great. If it's just tinted, watered down yellow, that's pretty sufficient. If it's clear, you're getting enough fluids.
That's awesome.
And that's the simplicity of it. However, there can be other like health complications that come with that if you're not thirsty. So if you notice like you're really not thirsty at all, I would talk to your doctor and see like, hey, maybe something's going on. What we find happens is as we drink more water, this is where I kind of put a baseline of 6 cups. As we drink more water, our body gets used to thirst. So we start feeling the thirst, or as we start eating, we start feeling the hunger. So those natural triggers start coming back.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, we have 2 that asked really similar questions. The one actually says that she has an immature cardiovascular system, and she was told that she's a snacker instead of a 3-meal eater, and because she gets full fast, is that okay? And there was another person asking, they said that they typically graze throughout the day instead of doing 3 meals. So they're wanting to know, is that okay? Is it healthy?
Yeah, and this is where, like I think I mentioned a little bit, but it's fine if you eat like that. That's totally fine. If you're that type of person, you don't need to become different. The fact that you're eating consistently is vital. So if you tend to graze, and here's what I do recommend for people that graze, do put things on a plate, because it helps with the enjoyment of food, even if it's like, or in a bowl or something. So let's say you're grazing and you eat some peanuts or whatever, you might just grab some and eat some. But if you actually put them in a container, it helps you have an idea of like, if you're really not eating very much. So it's oftentimes helps with the enjoyment. And then in regards to that, so why don't I get full easily? I would look at the hunger and fullness continuum if you do need it. I wonder if I can I don't think I can put it in the chat box. But if you do need it, I can figure out how to send it to you. I'm not quite sure how, but I'll figure that out.
If you guys send the panelists, you can send a private message to us with your email address. So if you want some of this information, go ahead and get your email in there while we're on this chat, and Christina can get that email to you. So these are awesome questions. I want to try to get to as many as we can. So what do you think about carbs? Many nutritionists say that carb isn't essential macronutrient. What are your thoughts?
Not accurate.
Okay.
So a lot of nutritionists, so like I mentioned, a lot of nutritionists do not have their degrees and do not have the research backing. So some do, but most do not. Also, I will say, I love so many doctors that I work with, but they typically only take one nutrition class. So even if your doctor recommends something, or you see on YouTube a doctor saying things, it always makes me cringe a little bit because they don't have the courses and the education to back what they're saying. So carbohydrates get picked on because people overdo them, and they're very complex. So it would take a long time to go into it. There are some, when we overdo them, there are some health implications. So that's why they get picked on. But you do need carbohydrates. This is when people say like, you don't need carbohydrates, it reminds me of in the 80s, there was a big fat craze, like don't have fats. And then as time went on, it was a huge problem. We find that people, when they do decrease carbs, so someone asked about the carnivore diet. Yeah. So that is a low carb diet, and keto diet, Atkins, they're very similar, or paleo, very similar. They're all a little different, but very similar, low carbs. Low carbohydrate intake will put you into fasting mode, and they want that for you because that does help decrease fat. Short term. Long term, what we find is it doesn't help. So this is where people are looking for quick results. Long-term results, it does not show to be helpful for actual weight loss or metabolic rates, or that means your metabolism, how well you process food, how well you process calories, all of these things, and can actually have some dangerous implications. I've had clients who have had severe diarrhea from doing too low carbohydrates. Brain function, there's possible issues with that, even that people, if they don't have carbohydrates, there's a possible connection of having poor memory and memory loss. So there's a lot of things being studied, but we actually can't study to the extreme because we would put people in starvation, and that's unethical. So I don't know if we'll ever have studies that really show, but what we do know is there have been studies of the effectiveness of carbohydrates, and we do see that they're essential. Like, you got to have them. Do you need a ton of them? No, but you need them consistently. What that means is about 2-3 carbohydrates per meal, actually. So consistently having them. And oftentimes when people don't have enough, they crave them, and then they end up binging on them, and that's not a helpful cycle. Right. Let's see. I did want to mention, someone asked about fullness. Why don't I feel full, or why don't I get full? Some of that might be your body needs more food. Here's where I would tell people, I recommend you see a dietitian. See a dietitian. Some of these things, like, they're very specific. I don't know you enough to know all the complexities of what's going on. So if I'm not, unless you're in Washington, I can't see you, but, and it sounds like a lot of you are non-Washington. So it's not anyway, licensed for Washington State. So, but with that, I would recommend that you, fasting. Okay. Yeah. I'll talk about fasting for a second. So, but I would recommend see a dietitian. Look for one that specializes in like intuitive eating or mindful eating, and works with maybe you have certain disorders that are coming up or health issues. Look for ones that specialize in that. And that can be a really helpful way to start, because if you have fullness issues, that can actually be a hormone issue. There's a certain hormone that helps with fullness. So there could be other complexities going on, but most of the time it's people just aren't eating enough, or feel like, oh, I'm eating way more than everyone else. So that's okay. Everyone's different. Okay, so I did just see one, but I don't want to skip ahead. But
there was somebody asking, how much protein do you suggest a day? 0.8 or 1.5?
Yeah, 1.5 is most likely too much unless you have like burns or other issues like healing issues. So 0.8, someone knows their research too, their nutrition. 0.8 is what is recommended. Now let me be specific. So this is where I'll be a little specific. This is based on adults, so we do want to be careful with that. So teenagers need a little bit more typically. So once again, working with the dietitian is going to be helpful for knowing where you're at exactly, but generally 0.8 is what we recommend. So what that means is 0.8 divided by your weight in kilograms. So 0.8 divided by your weight in kilograms. Now, if you do this, you're going to get a certain number, and then you're going to go, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? How do I know I'm getting enough? what that typically is, what it breaks down to typically, everyone's weight's different, but is about having a protein per meal. So if people have protein per meal, 3 to 4 proteins per day, serving, you can look up serving sizes if you really want, but typically serving of meat is the palm of your hand and a deck of cards. So that is about the serving you would need, or 1 to 2 eggs. If you have tofu, it's about the same. And I'm trying to think of other, like milk, it's a glass of milk. So that's if you have 3 to 4 of those a day, you're going to probably meet your protein needs. We also don't want to overdo them because it can be really harsh on our kidneys. And I have seen a young adult man who literally destroyed his kidneys by overdoing the protein. So I'm always really careful in those recommendations.
Wow.
Yeah, Ethan, 0.8 kilograms body weight. Many people, so for muscle gain, it may be 1, but we want to be careful because we don't, in the US, we don't do kilograms, we do pounds. So a lot of times people will do cheese, yep, cheese. I'm not sure, Elijah, exactly, but yeah, cheese is in the fat and the carbohydrate category, same as dairy. Cheese falls under dairy, and cheese is a great protein source.
So we have a couple in Q&A really quick. You guys have tons of amazing questions, and I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but somebody asked, do you have any tips for getting out of the mindset of always feeling the need to eat, even when you're full? Mm-hmm. You still have that craving to eat. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, so this probably falls more under stress or emotional eating. And so one of the main tips I would say is process your feelings. So this can be where you journal about and think through. This is for whoever asked that, like, highly recommend you work with a dietitian who specializes with what sometimes is called disordered eating. Any dietitian who specializes in eating disorders will work with emotional eating. So that if you even find a dietitian in your area right now, so many are doing telehealth. So even if they're far away, but in your state, you could be fine. But oftentimes it's feelings related or distraction. So when we're really stressed, we might stress eat because it's a way to distract, or we might be really perfectionistic or busy people, and perfectionists tend to always want to we might find that we then want to keep ourselves busy by eating. So it makes us feel better, like we're not just sitting down and relaxing. But it's okay to sit down and relax, process your feelings, give your time. I would walk away oftentimes from the kitchen if I'm full. So let me just walk away and process. Why am I, wanting to still go to food? Am I feeling a certain way? And that's typically pretty helpful. It's a good place to start. It won't fix it all because there's probably a lot of reasons going into that, but it's a good place to start.
Well, guys, I hate to stop because you do have so many questions. We do have the email, so if you guys want to go ahead and add your email if you have any more questions. But one of the things that Christina suggested is that you meet with a nutritionist yourself that is local, because you might have some greater questions, and there's always roots. We learned that last night in our lesson. There's always roots to a lot of these questions, like things that maybe you're struggling with, that you need to go to somebody that is in your community and close to you in contact to discuss these things. So it has been an amazing time. I would love to pray for you guys, and we're about to break out to go play games with LPU. So it's going to be awesome, and I'm excited. So let's pray real quick. God, we thank you so much that our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made and so complex, but God, you know how everything works. So I pray that we would be mindful about what we put into our bodies and not become obsessed. But God, it's good that you've given us brains and given us to research, but also people that are knowledgeable that we can reach out to so they can help support us to be healthy, both spiritually, physically, and emotionally. We thank you for Christina. Please bless her in her line of work, and let all of us have a great rest of the day. In Jesus' name, amen. Bye, guys. We'll see you later. Go join the LPU games.